In class, she's strict, but tonight, the rules belong to us. The first time I saw her, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't quite ready for. She walked into the lecture hall with a quiet authority that didn't demand attention, yet somehow commanded it anyway. Her heels clicked softly on the floor, echoing in rhythm with my own heartbeat, and for a moment, I couldn't focus on the syllabus. She was older than anyone I usually noticed, maybe early 40s, but there was a graceful energy about her, like someone who had mastered herself in a way I could only imagine. Her hair, a soft chestnut streaked with gold, caught the morning light as she turned to write on the board. The movement was effortless, natural, yet it held a subtle allure I couldn't name. I tried to concentrate on her words, literary theory, symbolism, narrative arcs, but my attention kept drifting to her hands. How they moved with quiet precision, the gentle way she adjusted her glasses, or returned graded papers to students. Once, her fingertips brushed mine as she handed back my assignment. It was barely noticeable, a fleeting touch, yet it sent a strange warmth curling through my chest. Her eyes were sharp, observant, and for anyone else they might have seemed intimidating. For me, they were like a secret doorway, an invitation to notice the unspoken. There was a spark of humor behind her professional poise, a fleeting smile when a student made an awkward comment. And when she caught me staring just slightly too long, she raised an eyebrow in that knowing way that made me both nervous and oddly exhilarated. After class, as everyone filed out, I stayed behind to gather my notes. She noticed me lingering and offered a small, polite smile. "Do you have a question?" she asked. The tone was casual, yet there was a warmth underneath the professionalism that caught me off guard. Her voice had a subtle depth, the kind that made you want to lean in closer, even just to listen. Walking back to my seat, I felt a strange mix of admiration and hesitation. She was untouchably composed, and yet somehow, the smallest gestures, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the brief flicker of a smile, the scent of her perfume that lingered in the room, made her feel inexplicably close. I realized then that this wasn't just a class. It was the start of something I didn't fully understand, a quiet pull that made me want to notice every detail, every nuance, and maybe, in time, earn a place in the small, private corners of her world. In that moment, I knew she would be impossible to forget. I hadn't expected to see her outside the classroom. The thought alone made my chest tighten in a way I didn't fully understand. But there she was, standing near the exit, gathering her papers and books with the same composed grace that had captivated me in class. She noticed me lingering, probably hoping I had a question, and tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing on her lips. "Do you want to discuss the assignment?" she asked, her tone casual, but there was a subtle warmth in it that made me forget how to answer. Before I could respond, she added, almost playfully, "Or perhaps over a cup of coffee." The invitation, innocuous on the surface, sent a thrill through me. Walking beside her toward the cafe, I became acutely aware of every detail, the way the sunlight hit her hair, the gentle sway of her stride, the faint perfume that clung to her without being overpowering. It was comforting and dizzying at the same time, like being drawn into a story you weren't ready to read. We found a small table tucked in a quiet corner of the cafe. The low hum of conversation around us created a cocoon-like intimacy, the world outside momentarily slipping away. She laughed softly at something I said, and I realized it was a sound I had been hearing in fragments in class but never fully appreciated. There was a subtle shift in the air between us, the distance that existed in the lecture hall seemed to dissolve. As we talked, I noticed the small, human details that made her even more captivating. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the tilt of her head when she listened intently, her fingers brushing lightly against the table as she emphasized a point. Each gesture was deliberate yet effortless, and each glance she gave me lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, like a secret shared in silence. Our conversation flowed easily, moving from assignments to books, to fleeting thoughts about life and dreams. At one point, our knees brushed under the table. It was brief, almost accidental, but it made my stomach lurch and my palms clammy. I caught her glance, and she didn't pull away, just smiled, that small, knowing smile that made the tension in the air feel electric yet safe. Walking back to campus afterward, I realized that this encounter had shifted something inside me. She wasn't just my teacher anymore. She was someone whose presence made ordinary moments feel charged, someone who had opened a door I didn't yet know I wanted to enter. And as I watched her wave goodbye, I knew I would be thinking about this walk, this conversation, and the subtle intimacy of her presence for a long, long time. After that first coffee, something shifted between us. The stiffness of the classroom rules began to loosen whenever we were alone. She had a way of speaking that made me forget the authority she held over grades and attendance, and I found myself laughing more freely than I had in weeks. Yet, even in laughter, there was an undercurrent, a subtle playfulness, a quiet teasing that left my heart hammering in ways I hadn't expected. Our conversations began to wander. We talked about literature, yes, but also about the kind of books we read as children, the films that had made us cry, and those secret guilty pleasures we never admitted aloud. She teased me gently about my naive interpretations, and I retaliated with playful jabs about her strict teacher persona, each comment delivered with that delicate balance of humor and unspoken tension. I noticed every small gesture, each one magnified by my growing awareness of her presence. The way her hand lightly brushed mine while turning a page in a shared textbook. The way her shoulder brushed against me as she leaned in to point at a paragraph. The soft warmth of her breath as she whispered a comment just for me. It was subtle, fleeting, but it made the air between us feel electric. At one point, she rested her hand near mine while arranging her papers on the cafe table. My fingers itched to touch hers, but I hesitated, captivated by the thrill of restraint. The almost contact was more intense than any touch, a silent game we were both consciously playing. Every glance held unspoken questions: how far is too far? How much is allowed before the rules of our worlds intervene? Her laughter, soft and knowing, filled the quiet pauses between our teasing. It was different from the classroom, it was intimate, like she was letting me in on a secret. I realized she was testing boundaries too, inviting me into a world beyond grades and lectures without ever saying so outright. There was no rush, no pressure, just a gradual, careful dance toward closeness. When we parted that day, I walked away with my chest tight and my mind racing. Her teasing, her playful banter, the subtle touches, they had stirred something deep inside me. I wanted more, yet I wanted to move slowly, to savor every moment of this uncharted connection. She had become more than a teacher, she had become a presence I couldn't ignore, a quiet challenge that teased both my curiosity and my restraint. And in the echo of her laughter, I knew that the rules we lived by, classroom rules, social rules, were only the beginning of the story we were about to write together. That evening, I found myself walking beside her again, though this time without the playful banter that had characterized our last encounter. There was a softness in her gaze, a subtle heaviness in the way she carried herself. It was the kind of vulnerability she never let show in the classroom, a quiet honesty that seemed both fragile and profound. We settled into a small park bench, the world around us muted by the gentle rustle of leaves and the faint chirp of crickets. She hesitated before speaking, as if weighing every word, and when she finally began, her voice was lower, softer, almost hesitant. She spoke about something personal, a struggle, a disappointment, a fear she'd never voiced to anyone in years. Listening to her, I felt a mix of awe and protectiveness. Here was someone so composed, so confident, yet underneath, she carried moments of doubt and loneliness just like anyone else. I became hyper-aware of the small details, the way her fingers fiddled with the zipper of her bag, the way her eyes briefly met mine before looking away, the slight quiver in her lips when she exhaled. Each gesture was laden with emotion, and it pulled me closer, not physically at first, but in the way you lean in to catch the tiniest nuance of someone's story. I wanted to reach out, to tell her she didn't have to bear it alone, yet I hesitated, unsure how much closeness she would allow. Eventually, our hands met, not fully, but almost. My palm brushed the back of hers, lingering in the moment just long enough for warmth to spread through both of us. It was a fleeting touch, yet it carried more weight than words ever could. I felt the steadiness of her heartbeat beneath her delicate wrist, a rhythm that seemed to echo the unspoken trust forming between us. She laughed softly, almost embarrassed at her own vulnerability, and I smiled back, careful to keep the moment tender and respectful. We didn't need words to fill the silence, presence alone conveyed understanding, empathy, and a connection deeper than casual friendship. I realized that this was the turning point. Our bond was no longer just about curiosity or playful teasing, it had evolved into something richer, more intimate, more human. Walking her back to the cafe where we had first met, I kept my hand near hers, close enough to offer comfort, distant enough to respect her boundaries. In that quiet evening, I understood that the slow, deliberate steps we were taking toward each other were the only way this connection could truly grow. And in her gentle, unguarded smile, I caught the reflection of something I had been longing for without knowing it, the possibility of being seen, truly, by someone remarkable. That evening, the world felt quieter, as if it had paused just for us. She looked at me with that familiar, teasing glint in her eyes and said, almost in passing, "In class, I'm strict, but tonight, I'll let you break rules." The words sent a thrill through me, not because of anything overt, but because they carried permission, the subtle release of tension we had both been holding on to. We wandered down the narrow streets of the city, the glow of streetlights casting long, golden shadows. She laughed at something I said, a laugh that was soft and musical, and for a moment, I forgot the world outside our little bubble. Our hands brushed under the pretense of casual movement, and each accidental touch was charged with warmth and awareness. I could feel the tiny sparks of connection in the gentle friction of our fingers. We stopped for ice cream at a small, dimly lit shop. She insisted I try the unusual flavor she picked, and I pretended reluctance, only to find myself savoring every bite. She leaned closer across the table, just enough that our elbows touched, sending a ripple of electricity through me. Her eyes crinkled in amusement, and I caught a moment of hesitation, a pause where our gazes met and held, long enough to make the air feel thicker, more intimate. There was a natural rhythm to our steps as we walked afterward, almost like an unspoken dance. Her shoulder brushed mine, and I felt the warmth radiate subtly, a reminder of the delicate proximity we now shared. Each laugh, each teasing comment, each fleeting touch became a language of its own, words unspoken but understood. The night made the city feel softer, more forgiving, and in it, we could explore the closeness we had only dared to imagine in fragments. At one point, she reached for my hand, just lightly, a tentative gesture, and held it for a heartbeat before letting go. That moment, brief as it was, felt monumental. It wasn't about urgency, it was about permission, trust, and mutual acknowledgement of desire without needing to define it. I realized then that the rules we had always followed, boundaries, decorum, age, social expectation, were being rewritten gently, carefully, with laughter and care. By the time we parted, the night had left its imprint. My chest was still warm from the brush of her fingers, my mind buzzing from the subtle intensity of her gaze. She had shown me a new way of being close, playful, daring, yet profoundly safe. And in her smile, I understood that the story between us had shifted, it was no longer just about curiosity or attraction. It was about exploring intimacy in a way that was tender, deliberate, and full of promise. The park was nearly empty that evening, the soft rustle of leaves and distant hum of city life forming a quiet backdrop for a moment that felt suspended in time. We sat together on a worn wooden bench, close but not touching, yet every subtle shift in posture, every glance, seemed magnified by the space between us. Words felt heavy, unnecessary, the silence itself carried more meaning than anything either of us could say. I noticed how her gaze lingered on me, softer than before, as though she were seeing not the student, but the person I was behind the surface. There was a vulnerability there, tempered by confidence, that made my chest tighten. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but something in the way she held herself told me that even here, boundaries mattered. And yet, that very restraint made the tension between us all the more electric. Her hand moved slightly, almost brushing mine as she adjusted her coat. The brief near contact made a warmth spread through me, a gentle but undeniable reminder of the connection simmering beneath the surface. I could feel her presence fully, the subtle scent of her perfume, the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the soft weight of her attention when it landed on me. In that stillness, everything felt amplified, the quiet longing, the restrained desire, the unspoken acknowledgement that we were both aware of the unusual, fragile intimacy we were building. I found myself studying the details I had never noticed before, the tilt of her head when she thought, the delicate curve of her fingers, the way her lips parted slightly as if she were about to speak, then stopped. Each pause was a question, each glance a small confession, and I realized that our silence had become a language in itself. I didn't need her to say anything, her presence alone was confession enough. I took a subtle, deliberate step closer, careful not to invade her space, letting the warmth of my shoulder brush hers. She didn't move away, instead, her eyes softened, and for a heartbeat, we simply existed there together. The world around us melted away, the park, the benches, the distant streetlights, leaving only the two of us suspended in a fragile, precious moment. When we finally stood to leave, our hands brushed again, this time intentionally, but still tentative. That fleeting contact spoke volumes, desire tempered by respect, intimacy carefully nurtured, trust growing in the quiet spaces between words. I realized then that this was the true essence of our connection, the unspoken confessions, the lingering glances, the silent acknowledgments of attraction. As we parted that night, I walked away with my heart racing, yet calm in a strange, contented way. The story between us was no longer about curiosity or playful teasing, it had become about emotional honesty, the slow, deliberate building of a bond that neither of us wanted to rush, but both of us longed to explore. The night felt different this time, softer, more intimate. The city lights glimmered in the distance as we walked side by side, a comfortable rhythm guiding our steps. There was no need for words, the unspoken understanding between us was palpable. After weeks of subtle touches, teasing, and lingering glances, we had arrived at a place where simply being near each other felt complete. We stopped at a quiet corner near the park, a familiar spot that had witnessed much of our slow unraveling toward closeness. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting both warmth and a trace of hesitation, and I realized she was as aware of the emotional gravity between us as I was. I wanted to bridge the distance, to let her feel the steady sincerity of my presence, and yet I also wanted to honor the careful pace we had set. Finally, she took a small step closer. Her arms reached around my shoulders, tentative at first, then more assured, as though confirming that the closeness we had nurtured was safe to hold. I responded naturally, wrapping my hands gently around her back, feeling the steady warmth of her body and the subtle rise and fall of her breath. For a moment, everything else faded, the world, the city, even the passage of time, leaving only this quiet, tender connection. Her cheek rested lightly against mine, soft and reassuring, and I felt a quiet thrill in the intimacy of the gesture. There was no urgency, no rush to define the moment beyond what it was, two people who had grown closer slowly, deliberately, and with genuine respect. Her hand lingered near mine, fingers brushing as we slowly pulled apart, each movement careful, deliberate, and charged with warmth. We laughed softly together, a shared release of tension that had been building for weeks. The sound of her laughter was familiar now, comforting in a way that made my chest ache pleasantly. In that simple, human moment, I realized that our story had always been about more than attraction, it was about trust, emotional honesty, and the slow, steady nurturing of intimacy that transcended age, social norms, and expectation. As we parted for the night, there was a lingering glance, a subtle squeeze of the hand, and a shared smile that spoke volumes. The story had reached its natural, satisfying conclusion, desire acknowledged, boundaries respected, and hearts quietly entwined. I walked away with a profound sense of warmth and anticipation, knowing that what we had was rare, delicate, and worth every cautious, tender step we had taken together. In that night's silence, I understood something simple yet extraordinary: love, when nurtured slowly and honestly, can be both electrifying and profoundly safe, and that this connection, was just the beginning of something beautiful. If you enjoyed this slow-burn romance and the quiet magic of age-gap connection, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that makes your heart race. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment made your heart flutter the most?